What is going on? I want to welcome you from half court for today. I am Sean Murphy, joined by Marquette's movement shooter, the Indianapolis premier own Troy Sergey. Troy, how are you doing, my man? We only have two more games of basketball remaining before the NBA season is over, but we are right in the midst of trade season, draft season. Things are not really over here.
Yeah, it's busy time here, Sean. I know, with the Pacers in the finals, things here in Indy are heating up, as well as the Fever are playing tonight too. So a lot of busy things going on, but we have a lot of hoops to talk about. And I think the fun part about the closing of the season is how much we'll have to talk about with free agency and the trade starting to pick up. And there already was a trade last week, so as sad as it is to see basketball wind down, we know it can certainly be a fun time of the year to get everything squared away for the next season with trades and other offseason moves.
Yeah, it was a much smaller scale trade, but there was a trade today between actually one of the teams in the NBA finals, the Indiana Pacers and the New Orleans Pelicans. It's a relatively meaningless trade, but the Pacers essentially traded a like back rotational player and a first round pick for this year to get their pick back next season. Essentially, this just cuts costs and allows them to like re-sign guys like Miles Turner, dip into the tax, and save a little bit of money in the process. Because let's be honest, whoever they were to get, like late in the first round, they were more than likely not making the rotation anytime soon on this roster, especially not worth what the payroll would be with tax.
Right. And I think definitely it gives the Pacers an opportunity to, see how, next season goes with, keeping that first round pick that they would have in 2026. Because you're right. We certainly know that with the draft coming up, whoever they would draft, at the tail end of the first round, if that's the 29th pick or even the 30th pick in the draft, probably not a guy that you're going to see being a six man or anything like that, especially with how high powered of a bench they already have with a Ben Mathurin and a TJ. So it almost just postpones. You don't need a draft pick this year if you're the Indiana Pacers. So I think it's going to be certainly one of those moves that doesn't shake things up too much. We don't want to talk too much about, but at least worth mentioning because I can't tell you another year where a team in the NBA Finals makes a trade while in the NBA Finals, even if it's so minimal like that.
Yeah, I think teams have done it in the past. I know there are rumors of OKC actually looking to move up into the lottery. So even the Thunder are still having their minds on NBA business, but that just shows you even in this craziness of this league, like even though you are still like finishing your season, you still have to be very mindful of your future and big picture. And one team that was not afraid to pull the trigger during the finals and make a big splash was the Orlando Magic, going out and getting Desmond Bane from the Memphis Grizzlies, exchanging. Orlando sent Cole Anthony, Contavious Caldwell Pope, on top of 4 first round picks. I think it ended up being like I think it ended up somehow being like 4 or 5 first round picks in that trade. Essentially, Troy, from what I've heard, like guys like Brian Windhorst explain, about 3 of those picks were to get Desmond Bane. Another 1 or 2 of those picks was to get off the Contavious Caldwell Pope contract because of the fact that he did not have a good season in Orlando. He is getting older. He is trending downward. And I think there's some real questions about who he could be, alongside without playing alongside a Nikola Jokic. Right. So, especially not, shooting well, they needed to go out and get a 3-point shooter. And I think Orlando most certainly did that. And I think if there's anything that we've learned, from, this offseason, thus far, Troy, and it's just beginning, is I think there's a lot of teams that are going to start asking themselves, looking at this finals and looking at this young crop of teams remaining, and they're going to be asking themselves the question, why not us? And I think that's exactly what the Orlando Magic did here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sean. There's so much, to unpack with that. And I think the big thing is, I said I didn't watch a ton of Orlando Magic basketball this year, but what I did watch was they have some good players, but they struggled to shoot the ball. They really did. They went on some stretches this season where, they really showed a lack of like a solid 3-point shooter. Yes, you have a KCP, but the age concerns are real. And I think a guy like Desmond Bane really does answer some of those questions, and it brings in a piece because you look at again, a team like the Pacers, who's in the NBA Finals. A Desmond Bane truly has the ability to be a Pascal Siakam like player as far as effectiveness, not similar play style, not similar positions, but I'm talking about effect on your team of that missing puzzle piece. And I think when you're in, a league like the NBA right now, where so much of it is, fitting well, scoring the basketball, being able to play rock solid, defense, and the Thunder and the Pacers, the two teams in the NBA Finals, they have that. They have pieces that can help their team win, have helped them win playoff games. And a Desmond Bane is the kind of guy that can come in playing alongside of a Paolo Banchero and a Franz Wagner, and I think get buckets, because this Orlando team needs to be able to have a player on their team that they can really trust to score the ball, shoot the 3-point shot, even when the other players are having off games. And Desmond Bane answers that question. Go ahead.
All right, trivia question, Troy. The Orlando Magic this last season finished 27th in the league in offensive rating. When is the last time the Orlando Magic have finished above the top 20 in offensive rating?
Was it the year they went to the finals?
It was 2011, 2012. So it was
a
like
little bit after,
right after they went to the finals.
but that still is such a long time. So yeah,
That was still with Stan Van Gundy as their head coach, and that was still when Dwight Howard
right.
was playing for them. Like
Right.
JJ Redick was a player for the Orlando Magic still.
Right,
The
right,
last
and
time
that's a guy
they've had
that
a
we know
top
could.
15 offense.
Right. That's a guy who we know that could stroke it. So wow, it's been a while since they've been able to get a player that's been able to do that. So
Yeah, no doubt. So definitely the best 3-point shooter that the Magic have had, arguably since JJ Redick. Like when you look into the numbers, and he's a guy who played really well, for Memphis. He was, and why, this trade is so perplexing to me, kind of getting to the Memphis side of it real quick before we talk about how this impacts the Pistons. This has probably been their most consistent and stable player, including John Morant and including Jaren Jackson Jr. Like Jaren Jackson Jr. is probably their best player. And I think that's like, if you're to truly prioritize, like building around anyone, it's probably Triple J. Although John Morant is, extremely beloved in Memphis, and he might be like their biggest star. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. is probably their best player, but their most consistent has probably been Desmond Bane. And of all the people to move off of, I question how much they're actually looking to win basketball games going into this season and going into the future, if this is the guy that they're willing to move off of. And it's not like they got like they got an incredible return. Like they got Cole Anthony, who I think is a really serviceable second unit player. They got, Kentavious Caldwell Pope, which, you and I are certainly part of the Kentavious Caldwell Pope fan club and still believe that. I still think there's probably still some good basketball in there left. However, I certainly don't think you're getting a player who can, get you like a solid percentage of what you lose in Desmond Bane. And really the big question is, well, how does this impact what you do, like going into the rest of your moves? Like Santi Aldama is going to be a restricted free agent. The Pistons are sniffing him. We'll be talking about him in a minute. It seems like he could certainly be a lot more attainable after this type of move, but also could Jaren Jackson Jr. be up for trade conversations? Could teams sniff around John Morant? Could we eventually see Memphis blow it up? Because if, we all look at that like John Morant interview where he said, we're fine in the West. But all of a sudden, things are very much not fine for the West and for the Memphis Grizzlies. especially now that you traded probably your second best player last year.
Yeah, I think the beautiful part about the NBA right now is anything can happen. Ever since the Luka trade, you can have more of these conversations about teams such as the Grizzlies of, well, they already got rid of Desmond Bain. What is those two guys' future with Ja and Triple J? And I think that rightfully so, we can ask that question because we know teams in the West are getting better. And Memphis had a window, I think 2022 and even 2023-ish, before all the shenanigans with Ja. We saw the Memphis Grizzlies play at such a high end, second seed in 2022 that we saw. So, but that window is very much clearly closed. The window is actually slammed shut, I would say, even with the current roster post probably pre-trade of trading away Desmond Bane. So I think a trade like this has to happen because you have to start over at times. It goes back to the window. When the window is closed, it doesn't matter what you want to do. It doesn't even matter who you have. You have to use the resources and the tradable assets that you have to start over and to try to get that window back open. And yeah, can they trade a John Morant? Of course they can. Can they trade Jaren Jackson Jr.? Of course they can. It's just a matter of what are they going to do. And I don't know if any of us, Sean, can make predictions. But you talk about Santi and going to Detroit Pistons potentially. At least he's a player that I think could help them in a lot of the areas in the defensive end that I think they're looking to improve upon. Yeah. Look at teams in the past when they are seriously looking to blow things up and make move on from contracts and whatnot. He's a player that I think they absolutely could this summer, and I think Detroit's a team that has the resources and the cap space to make it happen. Do you agree?
Oh, 100% I do. And I think, part of me wants to talk more about the Memphis side, but this is primarily a Pistons podcast. And I think if you're looking, like from the Pistons perspective of things, I think your window, to sign a Santi Aldama has opened massively. And as guys like Jake Fisher have reported, have said, this really seems like it could be the Pistons, like most likely target, his words, as he went on a Bleacher Report and, talked about that, which I think, certainly makes a lot of sense because Memphis seems like they're cutting costs. They're looking to, like pivot directions if they are indeed trying to, extend Jaren Jackson. And, they also, funny enough, have John Morant extension conversations coming up too. Like, I think if you are Detroit, like you could potentially do some form of sign and trade, with a Santi Aldama, and you have a little bit more say and leverage in a Aldama situation than you do a Naz Reid, because Santi Aldama is a restricted free agent. All he can do is go out and talk to other teams and receive offer sheets. He can't really decide where he's going to play. Like, Memphis can just decide to, sign and trade him to Detroit, which is really kind of the, like a very likely path, because if you're Memphis, you don't want to lose him for nothing. But on the other hand, like if you're Detroit too, like you want to sign, you still want to probably be able to sign Malik Beasley as well. Like that's like if you're talking about like the perfect like off season, for the Pistons, it's to be able to sign, 2 out of the 3 of Dennis Schroeder, Santi Aldama, and Malik Beasley. And probably the best case scenario is bringing in Aldama and keeping Malik Beasley.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I think this past season proves that. Yes, Dennis Schroeder played some great minutes for us, during the playoffs. But you're right. When you talk about what the Pistons need, Santi Aldama really does help this roster out a lot. And of course, we are not moving on from Malik Beasley. I think us Pistons fans, us people who are able to watch this team closely, and honestly, even your casual Pistons fans really know how much this guy helped our roster this year of scoring the basketball. The consistency that we saw from him, I think is unmatched. So yeah, I mean, you have to have some of those tough conversations. And, I don't think anyone likes to play that game of here's 3 great, valuable pieces, keep 2. That's not a fun conversation to have. When we look at the realistic landscape of the NBA, these are what our GMs are having conversations about. So we have to have them too.
Yeah, I mean it's the harsh business of the NBA. It's
Yeah.
the salary conversations of how do you make the puzzle pieces fit together. And if you're looking at like, this finals as a lesson of like how do you build a team, it's you have a superstar, you have a really good player to put alongside them, and then you have a ton of you have a ton of role players, young, like young guys on, on team friendly deals that, that and potential players in the wings that you can bring in as guys get older as contract conversations come up, like that's really what the Pistons should be eyeing is that maneuverability and that kind of flexibility going forward. And I think a guy like Santi Aldama makes, a ton of sense for them. And as great as, like Dennis Schroeder was, in his time after the trade deadline, I think bringing him back is more of a luxury than it is a necessity, just because you can always use more ball handlers, guys who can, who can run the offense outside of a Cade Cunningham and a Jaden Ivey. But, I think with Ivy coming back, if you can get another like stretch big who can space the floor and give guys more room to operate, but also just give you different looks defensively and just, more options with your rotation. I just think that inherently makes you a better team. And, I really think the more I think about it, Troy, the more I just see Dennis Schroeder in a Dallas Mavericks uniform being like the easiest option for them to plug and play at point guard while Kyrie Irving's waiting on the wings to come back from his injury. So I just, to me, I just envision, Dennis Schroeder probably not being back in a Pistons uniform as we get farther and farther removed from the postseason.
Right. And I think the Ivy conversation that you brought in is worth touching on because, I mean, let's be honest, Sean, were we going to bring in Dennis Schroeder if it weren't for Ivy, hitting down? If Ivy continued to play at the rate he was scoring the ball? Because really, when we think of Dennis Schroeder, that consistent scoring that he was able to bring was something that I remember from to the tail end of the regular season, certainly into the first 6 games of the playoffs against the Knicks. He's someone that we could rely on that end. Well, we know we can rely on Ivy to score the basketball, so that's where I think you use the phrase luxury, the necessity, and that's something that I think is the key to that puzzle piece of
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, that is a good question. Like, I do wonder if Detroit makes that move, if not for, the Ivy injury. Part of me thinks they do just because of the fact that they gave up very little to nothing in return. If anything, they just kind of helped facilitate a trade and used remaining cap, space that they had. And I think really all they gave up was like a second round pick, but I think they gained some compensation in there as well. So it was really like a minimal trade, but at the same time, the need really only came up and intensified, from the fact that Ivy was injured. But again, that team there was still kind of a need for a backup point guard, I think, as well. But I mean, the big question is, I do wonder, like just looking at this, at this trade, is does this force Detroit's hand to be more aggressive and to do something more drastic? And I do like the idea of kind of the reported, that what we know thus far, at least, of Detroit's offseason. Like obviously, Trajan Langdon has shown that he's very good at keeping his cards close to his chest. But at the same time, like I do wonder, like, is Detroit going to have to make some form of grander move, at some point if they do want to be in that Orlando, conversation, Indiana, Cleveland, like Boston if Jason Tatum comes back, Milwaukee's definitely if they like assuming Giannis is going to stay, which it seems like Giannis is staying, like there's a very real conversation to be had of does Detroit need to do something before the season starts? I don't know if they necessarily do, but I do think at least by the deadline, there has to be some form of conversation of what's, like, do they have to make a grander move by that time?
Yeah, I think that's still the right timeline to look at things. You have to still be very happy of how this team played against the New York Knicks in the first round. What I'm trying to get at is you still have to run it back, I think, in some areas with tweaking this roster in the offseason. And that's something I've said, in other podcasts too, of we have to look at the current roster, make adjustments, but not think totally big. But that you're right. I think we do have to talk about what you just talked about too. Of that, in no way, shape, or form, as good as we played, are we at the top of the conference yet. And I think when we think of from October to February, mid-February, what is that sample size? About 55 games. I mean, we sure know what this team is going to need by then, or what is clearly lacking, and what players are available. Because we also know that there's a lot of sellers at the trade deadline as well that we can look to take advantage of, if you will, and players that are not available today might be available at the deadline, and those are things that we have to consider as well. And so we got to play 50 games for me to really be okay with making a big splash. I don't think this summer is about a big splash. It's about making what we have better.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's still something to be said about playing it patient and and getting more clarity. I think Orlando, they were kind of at a point where things were starting to stall a little bit progress wise, whether some of that's due to injury, whether some of that's just due to roster limitations. Like it was inherently like just factual that they needed a jolt in the arm offensively. They needed something to change in order for them to really reach that true contender status that that they think that they can reach. And I do think that that puts them in that conversation. Like I would not be shocked if we see Orlando reach the conference finals. And once you get to that point, like much like we've seen with this Pacers team, as you get better and better as the postseason gets on, who knows what can happen if you put yourself in the right position. So, you know,
I was going to
go
say,
ahead.
bet on the guys you bring in, right? Bet on the guys that you're developing and putting around your clear stars that you've been able to get in the draft. You think of Franz and Paulo. I mean, you know what those guys can do. Bet on the guys that you're able to bring in and help play alongside of them, because you're right. Look at what the Pacers did. They knew that Tyrese Halliburton, and then bringing in Pascal Siakam was their core. They trusted those guys, but they really put their eggs in the basket. They bet on an Andrew Nembhard to be a stellar, consistent offensive threat. They've bet on a guy like T.J. McConnell. And I think you have to bet on those role players that you bring in, and trust that they can help you get over the hump when push comes to shove in some of those difficult playoff matchups.
For sure. But I think the big question, like I think the Pistons, we know, I think we have a decent idea about a lot of the ancillary pieces. I think they have, they have the number one guy. I think they have, a solid rotation of players who I think we know can be dependable role players, like when the situation calls. I don't have any questions about like whether or not Isaiah Stewart can produce in a late playoff situation. I don't have any questions about whether or not Ron Holland is going to be able to develop into a guy that can give you high effort minutes in those situations. We already saw flashes of that throughout this season. I think the question is, do the Pistons have that definitive number two guy? Do they have that Pascal Siakam, or that, that guy on the roster that makes them, that serious contender? And as much as we believe a guy like, a Jaden Ivey could maybe develop into that, or maybe a Sar could develop into that, at a certain point, you don't really know what your window is, and you need to go find a more proven commodity. Is there someone that Trajan has identified as someone that he potentially, wants to trade for? Could it be someone like a Trey Murphy that he knows super well from his time in New Orleans? We don't know. Could it be, a star player, on another team that could potentially not have asked out yet? Those are, some of the things that I'm just starting to wonder, because that's what Orlando's done. They identified Desmond Bane as someone that fit their culture, fit what they're doing. And if the opportunity came to be that he was available, they pounced on it. And I wonder if Detroit has that guy in mind.
Yeah. No, I certainly know exactly what you're saying, and I wonder myself, but I have no clue. But I do know that Trajan Langdon is going to get him when he's available. I do know that if that timing is not this off season, he's going to be patient, as we're probably assuming is going to need to be happened, of patience into the trade deadline, or maybe even next off season, right? You just don't as much as this is a league of moving around. You can't jump too early, as we've said so many times. Teams that jump early, at the end of the day, we've seen regret it.
Yeah, for sure. And like especially, it kind of like leans well into like the question because I think the big thing that everyone's waiting for and I think after that is when we're going to see a lot of more moves and teams react accordingly is where's Kevin Durant going to go? Because I think the waters have settled pretty clearly, with Giannis. It's pretty clear he's going to be in Milwaukee. But Kevin Durant, on the other hand, like the trade talks are heating up. The rumor mill is heating up. And the list of teams that Kevin Durant would be willing to commit to is essentially gone down to three. According to Shams Charania, it is the San Antonio Spurs, it's the Miami Heat, it's the Houston Rockets. So essentially the places where there's no state income tax. Got it. The team that, according to the Athletic, the one team that if Kevin Durant had his ultimate choice, where would he go? That reportedly is the San Antonio Spurs. Now, on one hand, Troy, if you're the Spurs, if you're Greg Popovich, you have the opportunity after having Chris Paul to bring in Kevin Durant to have work out with Victor Wembanyama, to play alongside De'Aaron Fox, like to have a really interesting, roster that who knows who like perhaps they could contend right away. On the other hand, they have the number 2 pick in this year's draft. More than likely, they're going to get Dylan Harper, who's a guard prospect being compared to the likes of like a James Harden. I've heard comparisons, to Cade Cunningham. He's someone that is like projecting to be a special player that could have been a number 1 overall pick in another draft class if it wasn't for Cooper Flag. They also have Stephon Castle, who just had a rookie of the year campaign, showed to probably be the best player in the class, just based off of how he played, at least thus far right now. Looking like someone who could definitely be that, that Tony Parker type of complimentary player to the, Tim Duncan that's Victor. And obviously we know Victor, he's going out doing shaman monk training right now and meditating and he's just a freak of nature as a prospect and a talent and as a competitor and just a really smart individual. On one hand, Troy, again, like I see the like the prospect of if you can get him at the right price, if you're the San Antonio Spurs, like you can go get Kevin Durant, like hell yeah, let's go get Kevin Durant if he wants to be here. But at the same time, the Spurs just got a well of riches and luxurious assets to their disposal. Do you blow all of that so quickly just to go get a 37-year-old Kevin Durant? I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, it's a tough decision. Um, I'm still probably gonna go no because of how much that second overall pick. I watched some Dylan Harper. Man, the guy can facilitate. The guy can score. He's a guy that I don't think, or sorry, he's a guy that I do think you would regret trading, knowing that he could have been your pick. I mean, look at the Philadelphia 76ers. They have to live with the fact that Jason Tatum could have been in their uniform. That's something that it's just hard for teams to fathom. Moving on now, I still think San Antonio is worth betting on of really just looking at them long term of what kind of team that they can be with Wimby at hand. I think you use this draft pick. You may listen to other offers, but I say you keep the pick. You draft Dylan Harper. You have him alongside of Castle. I know that might be something interesting to watch how the two of them complement each other. But I think you have two very young players. If you had a Harper, a Castle, and a Wimby, that's a team you want to build around. I don't think you go get that star. I don't think that. I think if anything of what the Thunder and the Pacers have taught us is that it's not all about getting that superstar. It's about developing the younger guys, assessing the talent that you have, and bringing players to go alongside of them.
Yeah, for sure. Like looking at like reportedly what the Suns are asking for in these trade conversations, it sounds like they want the number 2 pick and or Stephon Castle, which it sounds like if the Spurs want to make this move happen, it sounds like they want to make the move without trading either Stephon Castle or the number 2 overall pick. And I mean, Troy, if we're being honest here, what leverage do the Phoenix Suns have? Like the reports like Wendy floated out today on on like a Phoenix network that perhaps like they could like Phoenix could be comfortable with bringing back Kevin Durant if they don't like what they get, but Kevin Durant is not going to be a happy camper if that happens. He has a very finite amount of time left in his career, especially time that like potentially playing at this high of a level. And especially like you are not going to get back nearly what you gave away. And I think the biggest wild card in this whole thing is everyone's just presumed that, Kevin Durant is most definitely going to get moved and it's going to be to a place that he preferred. Do we remember who's doing the negotiations here for Phoenix? Do you remember who their owner is? This is Matt Ishbia we're talking about. He works in the mortgage business. He doesn't care about people's feelings.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Sean. And that's something that the Phoenix Suns, need to think about. But at the same time, I still think you got to move them. I care about feelings, so I guess I guess I don't want a player that caliber of Kevin Durant on my roster if he's not all in. If he's going to cause locker room problems, if he's not going to be giving it his all, there's no reason I need to keep him on my roster. So you're right of what what you are saying is true, but I just think that what we saw the last month or even month and a half of Kevin Durant in a Phoenix Suns uniform, I do not want that bleeding into next season at all. I want that to be yesterday's problem, not tomorrow's.
Well, and the reason why they're gonna have to ultimately move on from Kevin Durant is because if you have an unhappy Kevin Durant in your building, that's going to lead to an unhappy Devin Booker. And if truly their biggest priority is holding on to Devin Booker, how do you make Devin Booker happy? It's by fielding a competitive roster. How do you do that? Get players that are going to be happy. Who's going to be happy? Not Kevin Durant. That is apparent. The second you tried to trade him, which all reports suggest the deal to Kevin Durant to Golden State was done. All it took was Kevin Durant's approval, which he did not give. So, like, it was done.
Yeah, yeah.
Once that happened, his trust is gone.
Right, right, right. Yeah, you have to connect the dots, and I think looking at Devin Booker's role in all of this is worth pointing out as well. Of you know, no matter even if the Suns trade Durant and don't get what they want as much of return, I think it's still better than risking two unhappy campers of Booker and Durant in that organization.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the team that continues to float around in the Kevin Durant sweepstakes is the Minnesota Timberwolves, despite the fact that they are not on Kevin Durant's list of preferred teams. Like Shams came out and said, Kevin Durant does not want to play for the Minnesota Timberwolves. However, if you listen to like what the most competitive offers that have come forward for Kevin Durant, it's not from the Spurs. It's from the Miami Heat. It's from it's from the Houston Rockets, which they're being pretty reluctant to give away anything major as well, which to their right, they don't like they hold cards here too. It's because they hold all of Phoenix's picks. So they hold some real leverage
Right,
here.
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. That certainly
I
makes.
mean, there's already reports, Troy. Like, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's already reports about Phoenix searching of what they could get in return for Jalen Green.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, yeah. I tell you, this all goes back to making that big trade to land Kevin Durant in the first place. It goes back to the assets that they gave up. We have to look at this Kevin Durant unhappy thing as a symptom to the bigger problem of pulling the trigger way too early of getting him in the first place.
Well, do you know? I mean, way too early might even be selling it short of how early it was. You know, like like the sale of the franchise, Troy. Do you know how long Matt Ishbia was the owner of the Suns before he made this trade?
12 hours, right?
Yes, 12 hours. The
and
dude like barely settled into Phoenix.
and
He
Bradley
barely
Beal,
had a cocktail
Bradley
and he gave
Beal,
up everything.
the Bradley Beal contract just makes this even worse, doesn't it?
Oh dear God. Oh dear God. Yeah, it kicks you while you're down. And all reports I heard he actually just bought another condo in Scottsdale. Like he's settling down. Like this game of chicken, Bradley Beal is prepared to win. He is locked in. He is making a lot of money playing basketball. He is happy. And I saw a report saying that Phoenix is hopeful that with Kevin Durant off the team, that they could see that they could see Bradley Beal get back to closer to his older self in production, which like okay, like you can hope that. Go ahead. I wouldn't rely on it.
So, Sean, we have to go back to the original question of looking at Kevin Durant's destinations and looking at obviously Spurs being probably the most likely scenario. But do you think it actually goes down? Do you think both teams pull the trigger? Like, what's a Sean Murphy prediction with really looking at how both teams have interacted with each other?
I think that it's something that I only think it happens if Wimby goes to Pop and says, "I want Kevin Durant." Which, listen, that's very possible because we like that's Wimby's favorite player. But at the same time, I think Wemby's like he reminds me, kind of like a Dirk or even like how Luca approached like the front office where he lets them make their decisions. If there's anyone that's gonna have any cachet to have trust to like make any decisions, it's Greg Popovich. So I don't necessarily know if he's gonna force the issue. I just think Houston makes the most sense for Kevin Durant because for one, it's a team that he wouldn't mind playing for. No state income tax, a competitive young team that he can play alongside. And then if you're Phoenix, this is your chance to retool the right way, to get your own picks, to have some form of control over your own destiny. And you can also potentially get more players to flip for some form of assets as well. Because if you're getting Jalen Green back in return in a Kevin Durant trade, he's not staying in Phoenix.
Rental player.
You're
Yeah.
not you're not playing Devin Booker and Jalen Green and Bradley Beal together. That's not happening. So that's where I almost wonder, would Memphis be a Jalen Green landing spot? Like what other teams, we know a lot of other teams are going to be looking to make moves, this offseason. I wonder what the next Jalen Green landing spot could be. The reports are he wants to stay in Houston and right the wrongs, of his playoff performances. I unfortunately just don't think that opportunity is going to come for Jalen Green. I think if they have the opportunity to go get Kevin Durant, I think they're going to go and try and get Kevin Durant.
It's going to be fun, Sean. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out because you're right. I mean, when we were growing up, players like Kevin Durant were not on the market. And we think of how much he's been dealt the past couple of years. It's just incredible to see how much of a movement we are of a league we are with some of the contracts things with just trades, free agencies, and it just change. It constantly makes the landscape of the league change at all times. It makes teams that were once competitive last year towards the bottom of the lottery, and it makes lottery teams somewhat competitive and all in of competing for a championship. It's just
Yep.
incredible how much the landscape of the league has evolved for in the past 5 or 10 years.
I mean, the landscape of the league is completely different from the start of the finals, Troy. Like the entire Eastern Conference landscape for next season changed from the beginning of the finals.
Yeah,
We're not even talking about the draft or free agency. Like we still have so much more to go. Just one trade of major consequences happened, and that already changed the balance of power in the East.
it did. It absolutely did. And we're going to be saying this phrase, I think, for the next at least 9 months. The East is wide open.
Yeah. And I think that is why you have to ask the questions about the urgency and how, Trajan in the front office is going to approach it and view it. Because if you have a Cade Cunningham and a lot of these budding young stars, like I have a hard time envisioning them not creeping into their head the question of why not us? Because that's a very real thing. Like if you look at and I think like just let's just real quick, before we end the podcast, let's just do a quick glance over the Eastern Conference and let's just look at each team and just take a guess of how they're going to view this next season. Like I think Cleveland most definitely think they're going to think they have a chance. Boston, this is probably a pivot year, but if Jason Tatum's rehab goes well, who knows? Like the Knicks, they have delusion of grandeur. They probably think, that they should be winning the title right now. The Pacers, of course, think that they're going to be able to get right back. They're probably going to play with a confidence that they didn't have last year. The Pistons are most definitely like going to think that they're going to be taking a step up. Tom Gores himself said that the expectations to advance in the playoffs next season, the Milwaukee Bucks, as long as you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, you think you're going to be competitive. That's not even getting into Atlanta, who knows what they're going to do. The Chicago Bulls, Billy Donovan just got an extension because they're excited about what their next steps are. I think they're probably a bottom 3 team in the East, but who knows? But you have Miami who wants to, be more competitive. All reports are that Toronto is looking to position themselves and be more aggressive. Like Philadelphia, they're all like with Daryl Morey, they're going to want to do a lot better than they did last season. Like outside of like Brooklyn, Charlotte, and in Washington, I think there's a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference that might be asking themselves the question, why not us? Even if not all of them have a reason to ask themselves that question right now.
Wow, 12 contenders. Just kidding. but you're right. I mean, your assessment of all of those teams, I think, are really accurate. And like I said, there's always buyers and there's always sellers during the off season and into the regular season, all the way up to the trade deadline. And it's just going to be really interesting to see. We know locker room things always play an issue into that as well. Teams make mistakes too. Teams think that they can move on from a player that isn't fully developed and vice versa. So how those things change the landscape of the league is always worth looking at. And as much as we talk about the East, Lakers, whatever team Kevin Durant goes for, Cooper Flagg's rookie year.
I was about to ask the question, as many teams that could be looking to rise up in the East, could we have more teams looking to take a step back in the West?
Yeah.
Because you have Oklahoma City looking as dominant as they are. Houston looks like they're pushing their chips in. But like outside of that, like I mean, obviously you have Denver and like Minnesota, they're gonna look to be interesting, but like it is a real race to the middle of the pack there.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of teams that are to just be like treading water and like asking themselves, like, what are you doing? And I think Memphis might be one of the first teams we're seeing truly go, wait, why are we trying to win right now?
And look at even what the conference in the West looked like after game like 78 with like 3 games left. Those last 4 couple of games really changed the landscape of the seeding. And we know home court advantage does matter, right? Matchups in the playoffs do matter. Star versus star. How does that match up? How do role players play into some of those matchups? And you look at the team like the Lakers. I mean, they were consistently like that around that 5th seed all year long, and they somehow teams in front of them lost a few games, and they ended up being the 2nd seed. Things like that happen, and matchups and home court advantage seeding do play into early exits or upsets in the playoffs.
Well, I'm not sure that's a great example though, because then the Lakers lost in the first round to the Timberwolves.
But matchup. The Timberwolves were the better matchup, even though they were the lower seed.
I'm still not entirely sure what point you're trying to make. But
I'm trying to make the point of anything can happen.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I think, and again, I think you're going to see a lot of teams just have like some real interesting approaches this summer. Like this doesn't even get into like what the heck could the Sacramento Kings do this summer with brand new management? Like it is like what are the Dallas Mavericks going to do now that Cooper Flagg's coming into the fold? Like the Knicks, they still apparently might want to go get Jason Kidd as
Right.
their head coach,
Yeah.
even though they've already been told no. So, what are they going to have to do to turn that into a yes? We'll find out. But Troy, whatever happens throughout this offseason, we're going to be right here to break it all down. And I'm really excited. Thank you for being here as always, Troy. And thank you for joining us and listening each and every week. Be sure you like the video, smash that subscribe button. We'll catch you guys next time right here from Half Court.